Hello and welcome to Invest Africa. I am Godfrey Mutizwa. Now, over the coming weeks, we will be taking an in-depth look at the challenges and opportunities associated with investing in Africa. We will be traveling up and down the continent, getting insight into the various economic territories across Africa. Now, Nigeria is Africa's most populous country with 150 million plus people. With an economy growing at an annual 7%, the country is one of the continent's hottest investment destinations. This week, we unpack some of the investment challenges and opportunities that this West African powerhouse faces.
Nigeria, the West African country located on the Gulf of Guinea, covers a total area of just over 900,000 square kilometers. The 32nd largest country in the world hosts Lagos, the largest city in sub-Saharan Africa, with an estimated population of 8 million people in its urban area alone. Although endowed with a supply of natural resources, Nigeria has a wide array of underexploited mineral resources, including natural gas, coal and gold. Despite huge deposits of these natural resources, the mining industry in Nigeria is still in its infancy. Classified as a mixed economy emerging market by the World Bank, Nigeria has reached middle income status with well-developed financial, legal, communications and transport sectors. The country also boasts the second largest stock exchange in Africa. Nigeria is the United States' largest trading partner in sub-Saharan Africa and supplies a fifth of its oil. Other export partners include India, Brazil and Spain, to which it also exports cocoa. Import partners include China, Netherlands and France, from which machinery, chemicals and transport are imported. Economic development had previously been hindered by years of military rule and corruption. Since 2008, the government began to show the political will to implement the market-orientated reforms required, such as modernizing its banking system, curbing inflation by blocking excessive wage demands, and resolving regional disputes over the distribution of earnings from the oil industry. This saw Nigeria emerge as the second largest economy in Africa. GDP also rose strongly between 2007 and 2011 due to growth in non-oil sectors, powered by robust global crude oil prices. The oil-rich country is the world's 12th largest producer of petroleum. It accounts for 40% of the country's GDP and 80% of government revenue. But the government's lack of funds to pay for oil subsidies, with half the budget it allocated already spent, had prompted private firms to halt imports, which triggered protests and threatened the economy's economic expansion. However, the federal government's announcement to resume subsidy payments by next month will hopefully steer the government's growth development goals back on track.
Thank you, Tumisho, for that overview of the Nigerian economy. Now, Nigeria is the 41st largest economy in the world. Now, this is according to the IMF, and these are 2011 figures. We're talking about an economy that's worth 239 billion rand in gross domestic product. Now, according to the World Bank, though, this is a country that was ranked 133 out of 183 countries in terms of the ease of doing business in Nigeria. Now, joining me in studio to give us their views on Nigeria as a business and investment destination is Diana Games, she's CEO of Africa at Work, Joel Chimanda, Principal, JC Capital, and Suresh Chaitu, Sector Director, Banks and DFIs for Africa and Latin America at RMB. Lady and gentlemen, thank you for your time. I'm going to do the honorable thing and begin with the lady. Diana, you also serve as honorary CEO of the SA Nigeria Chamber of Commerce. When you look at Nigeria, I've just given that overview, ranked number 133 out of 183 countries. That doesn't suggest a country that is that makes it possible for business to carry on their work in the correct environment. From where you sit and after watching Nigeria over the years, is it as difficult as this number suggests?
I think it's fair to say that it's getting a lot easier to do business in Nigeria, but a central problem is the fact that the economy has grown organically over the years, and I think a lot of dysfunctionalities have become quite entrenched, or maybe perhaps I could call them sort of cultural differences, which other people from outside find quite difficult to manage. But I think that everything is getting a lot easier. Nigerian companies are growing and becoming more international as the country is exposed to the rest of the world. There's private equity is playing quite a big role in changing the environment and new funding and the government itself through a lot of significant reforms.
Yeah, but if we are ranking it, would you say number 133 out of 183 is accurate and fair?
I think I would at this stage.
Okay.
I know Nigerians wouldn't like that, because I think, but it's also, you know, a lot of stuff, a lot of developments are happening, particularly in Lagos. So when you measure the whole country, I think you're starting to see a different picture.
Yeah.
If you take into account the doing business in the 36 states, which vary quite considerably in the ease of doing business, etc.
Yeah. So there is progress, and Joel, you are probably a good voice for us to have on the show, particularly today, because now you have spent the last 18 months operational on the ground in Nigeria, which means you are seeing the progress that Diana is talking about. Give us an overview of what you have seen so far as a person who has come in and actually put capital on the ground in Nigeria.
For me, Nigeria is one of the top 5 investment destinations within emerging markets and Africa. And Nigeria presents a very specific opportunity. It's got a market of 150, 160 million people, depending on whose numbers you speak with.
Yeah. I was very careful. My numbers, I said 150 million plus.
Yeah. If you look at the ease of doing business in Africa, there's a lot of good indicators with regard to the Nigeria market. 133 is the overall ranking. If you look at the ability to get credit, they are ranked number 78. If you look at the ability to deal with insolvencies, they are under 100. If you look at their property registering regime, it's weaker, around 180. So for me, what could be referred to as positive or negative is an opportunity in the context of what business you want to play.
Yeah.
We took a view to go into the energy power sector as one of the core industries or businesses that we would serve, and into the real estate sector.
Right.
So, and the reason we looked at energy and power, Nigeria today has an installed generation capacity of 10,000 megawatts. And government is going through a privatization process which will see 18 companies privatized. The objective is for them to move up the current 3,500 megawatts power delivered onto the grid into the 5,000 and back to 10,000 megawatts. Our specific opportunity that we see in Nigeria is that before 2020, they require 40,000 megawatts. And if you look at Nigeria relative to a middle developed economy such as South Africa, with 150 million people, they require 150,000 megawatts. So our business proposition and our investors is we took a view that if we go and we play in that energy, power, infrastructure sector, there is enough willpower from a government perspective, because this is the first time the privatization is now reaching financial bid stage. And if financial bid stage reaches closer, it means the assets will be disposed. And I believe once Nigeria seriously address the power bottleneck, or if they take the right steps towards resolving the power bottleneck, I believe the rest of the economy will start moving. So
133 out of 183, I'll come back to that question again. Is that a fair ranking based on your experience of doing business in Nigeria?
It's a very tough market. So
I'm reading that as a yes.
You see, for me, again, the hesitation is, do I say it's difficult? Why am I there?
Right.
So I had 3 economies which I could take my investors to. One is Ethiopia, the second one is Nigeria, and the third one is Angola.
Okay, and you chose Nigeria.
I chose Nigeria. So for me, I see the opportunity outweighs the ranking in a simplistic way.
Suresh, he doesn't want to characterize it in terms of numbers, but you are inside the bank and all you do every day is look at numbers and crunch them and putting them into all sorts of models. When you look at the overall business environment in Nigeria, is 133 out of 183 a fair ranking in terms of what you guys have seen as first looking out, and then now on the verge of coming in and putting in mortar and bricks on the ground?
Yeah. Godfrey, I think the context in which we looked at Nigeria, as you know, Rand Merchant Bank will be starting operations as an investment bank in Nigeria quite soon, around September, October. So certainly we've seen it as a great investment destination. But more importantly, the context of which we looked at Nigeria was in the context of its power and actual character within the African continent.
Right.
I mean, you can't ignore Africa's second biggest economy. There's been a lot of debate about Nigeria taking over South Africa as the largest economy. And if you just look at the macroeconomic fundamentals, I mean, our estimates are between 160 to 180 million people. Largely very young.
Those are your numbers.
Those are our estimates in terms of the population. But more importantly, we have an emerging young middle class growing, large amounts of gaps in terms of infrastructure, which, I mean, just those two things in itself create a huge amounts of opportunity. So we are looking at it as being number 2 in Africa, as opposed to, you know, looking at Nigeria's sort of rankings in terms of the global stage, because it's really Africa in which Nigeria has the most influences.
Yeah, so let's look at some of the key issues in terms of the difficulty of doing business in Nigeria. Remember, in this section, we just want to examine just how difficult or easy it is to do business in Nigeria. Let me begin with you. In terms of the key issues that one needs to look at if they are looking to invest in Nigeria, please give me, I'm hoping you can give me at least 5 very quickly, because we have 3 minutes in which to discuss this.
I think the first issue is bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy.
As most emerging market countries, particularly in
Is
Africa.
that a code word for corruption?
No, I'm talking more bureaucracy,
Okay.
about actually getting to do business.
Okay.
The second thing has been about really navigating some of the issues regarding corruption, particularly within the civil sector. I think the third thing has been about really understanding the regulations and the transformation of those particular regulations. Fourth, infrastructure. I think any investor coming into Nigeria needs to understand the challenges in regards to infrastructure, and is able to navigate those challenges to see some of the key opportunities as far as it's concerned.
Okay.
And I think the fifth issue is really around security issues.
Right.
We've seen that more emerging recently with the advent of Boko Haram and so, you know, some of the instability issues within the Niger Delta sector.
Yeah.
Once you are able to navigate those 5 issues, I think you'll be able to then see clearly the opportunities within this very big emerging economy.
Yeah. Diana, before I come to the businessman who's put money on the ground, if I were to rank those issues, and I'd like you to ask you if you have any that you'd like to add to that list, if you were to rank those issues in terms of importance, would you change the order in which you gave them?
Well, now you're asking because I didn't actually remember which order he gave them, but I would say they're all important. I would add possibly a couple more, one of which would be logistics, which is a very big problem for a lot of people, particularly fast-moving consumer goods, which is, as you know, a fast-growing area of business. I would also add sort of what I call hidden interests, hidden special interests, which are among policymakers and even among business people, you know, where certain things are frustrated because people have interests that perhaps aren't disclosed. And that doesn't sound like it's not tangible, but it's a very big factor which has frustrated big things like, for example, just power reform. Hasn't been able to get off the ground because of private interests in the fuel industry and in generators and things like that. So to me, that's one of the pitfalls people are not always looking at in terms of the risk.
That's an interesting one. Joe, let me come to you. I mean, hidden interest, did you meet some of them on your way?
There is no market
where there's no hidden interest.
that we have done any work that there isn't hidden interest. So hidden interest is part of the analysis one takes in the relationship, in the deal, or in the country that you work in. And then you have to take a view, the extent to which you accept dealing with what is made available to you formally versus what you pick up in terms of your own informal due diligence. And I think that's a business decision based on the core values of either your investors or your organization or the people that you are providing assistance.
Does that compromise you though? Because I'm remembering the case of Econet years ago when they went into Nigeria, and I remember the whole story about first when they went in and then the percentage of shares that they hold in the company that they set up, and then the whole argument about later who said what, who owned what, and who was supposed to have gotten what.
In my view, we are talking about the ease of doing business. When we spoke to our shareholders, our view, we looked at the ability or the ranking in terms of protecting investors' interest. Nigeria actually ranks 65 in terms of the ranking. If you look at enforcing contracts, Nigeria ranks 97. If you look
Is that bad or good?
Well, you're comparing relative to 180.
97,
So,
you're
yeah.
almost halfway.
But what I'm trying to say is that Nigeria is not as, it's looked at more negatively than it really is. When you get on the ground and you start understanding how they do business and you engage, there's enough credible business people and there's enough deals that can be done without corruption as a challenge.
Yeah.
So I think one has to move away from the veil where one refers to the market or the country in generic terms. My experience is very positive, and I am confident that our decision to move into the Nigeria as a core market and moving our head office and our core business delivery platform from South Africa into Nigeria over the next 3 to 5 years is going to yield the result that enable us to realize our objective when we moved into the market.
We have to take a break, but I would hope before the program finishes that we rank those issues in terms of their importance, in terms of issues that you need addressed. But I'll also put a challenge to you guys. Is hidden interest not another word for corruption? But that discussion, we'll have it in the second half. We're going to take a break, as I said now. More on Invest Africa when we return. You're watching Invest Africa. Now, Nigeria's Vision 2020 is aimed at making Nigeria one of the world's 20 largest economies by 2020. Various reforms such as economic liberalization, deregulation and privatization of state-owned enterprises will continue to be implemented over the next 8 years in order for the country to realize its economic dream.
Nigeria is one of the nations that have flown below the radar for investors, and in years to come, it is anticipated that the country will stand out as one of the economic powerhouses. Although Nigeria still grapples with rehabilitating its infrastructure, it has carefully targeted investments that will drive economic growth.
Investment is slowly filtering through Nigeria in terms of activity on the continent, infrastructure-wise, is one of the countries who are doing the most to get things back on track. But they certainly have a lot of challenges just based on their population, and from that demand point of view, you know, people are requiring a lot of electricity. So the infrastructure has fallen behind, but they are doing well to catch up, and they've also opened themselves up to support from the rest of the continent, which is a very good and important thing that they've done.
Nigeria has one of the fastest growing telecommunications market in the world. Major emerging market operators like MTN have based their largest and most profitable centers in the country.
Each country is different, and we have grown to know, and it's actually now developed into our DNA, to make sure that we innovate to a specific market. You need to do research and understand a particular market in a particular country, and then come up with services products and services that are specifically tailor-made for that market. Some products are general and can be adapted easily from market to market, but some need to be specific to what the customers in that particular market are looking for.
However, to improve prospects for success, potential investors must educate themselves extensively on local conditions and business practices.
We have regular communication with our distributors to make sure that we understand what their needs are, how can we assist them in running more efficient and more effective businesses, while it helps them develop, while it brings economic development in their lives and in their families. It also helps us to make sure that we get our products out there to the people. So it's a win-win situation. And as I say, each country is unique. There are basics that we learn from one country to the next, but you really need to understand a particular country that you're in to be able to make sure that you maximize your offerings and your partnerships with that particular community.
The Nigerian government has also recently begun expanding its infrastructure to space-based communications. Such technologies have been instrumental in connecting rural and urban areas.
helping people in remote and rural areas get access to the kind of quality broadband that brings them new access to education, employment and healthcare information.
The growth in Nigeria's ICT sector has opened various avenues for investment opportunities. However, this growth could soon begin to decline if the poor power supply is not addressed.
Yes, those are real challenges, but then you look at them and say, what else can I come up with which will not only enable me to do business, but that will also benefit the community, and that will also benefit the country and the world in us getting greener, as opposed to just sticking out and just getting generators running all the time, more especially in Nigeria, because in the past we'd have seen it's a lot easier to do that because diesel is subsidized, although that's going away. But even with that, you need to be looking at what are the alternatives that are good for the environment and that makes good business sense.
As the big headliners for economic growth lose their appeal, the search for new stars has begun, and enhancing regulatory frameworks, rebuilding and maintaining infrastructure will ensure that Nigeria is ready to take centre stage. Dubisha Makanyele, Johannesburg.
Thanks again to Misha. Now still with me in the studio is Diana Games, she's CEO Africa at Work, and Joel Chimanda, his principal, JC Capital, and Suresh Chaitu, Sector Director, Banks and DFIs for Africa and Latin America at RMB. Let's begin, before we move on to the other discussion, which we'll take at the end of the program. Just look at the opportunity that Nigeria represents. I mean, we talk different numbers here. I just hit just under 200 million people in terms of population. So it's a large population. We're talking about the 41st largest economy in the world. Let's outline those investment opportunities in Nigeria. Let me begin with you from a banking perspective. Just quickly, if you can run us through those investment opportunities.
Godfrey, the bankable population in Nigeria, if you just look at the amount of people banked.
Speaking like a true bank.
10% of Nigerians are actually banked.
Right.
So this represents a huge opportunity for the banking sector. Again, growing middle class, coupled with very weak infrastructure and growing infrastructure needs, presents another huge opportunity in various infrastructure sectors for the bank. We've been dealing for the past 10 years in Nigeria, and in starting up an investment bank in Nigeria, what we really wanted to do is we've already identified the opportunities for growth in these various sectors, and want to obviously capitalize on those opportunities by working with both local and international banks to actually bring some of the visions that the government has set in Nigeria to the fore. Yeah.
Joel, I know you've identified infrastructure, and particularly power is the key, but from where you stand as an investor, if you can.
For us, we identified 4 broad areas. Okay. The first area is energy, power, infrastructure.
Right.
The second area is real estate, and I'm talking property where you have residential, you have commercial, and you have retail.
Okay.
And the third subsector that we identified is the mid-cap SMEs. And in that subsection, we are looking at companies that are sitting in the manufacturing, in the agro-processing, and in the mineral beneficiation subsector. And our strategy is based on identifying the entrepreneur who has identified the opportunity, and our value proposition is to bring the capacity from a financing perspective, from the technical partners perspective, to bring bankability to an idea that comes from $1 million PAT to a $20-30 million PAT over a 10-year period.
That's profit after tax?
Yes.
Okay. Diana, you probably know more than all of us about what investment opportunities are in Nigeria, given your role as ordinary CEO of the SA Nigeria Chamber of Commerce. Give us a quick one. Have they left anything out?
Well, obviously infrastructure is a key across the board.
Is it the biggest though? It is.
I think certainly in terms of money, I would say it is. I think power is absolutely crucial. A lot of manufacturers in Nigeria will tell you that their biggest headache is actually getting long-term money, and that is a role that obviously all the sort of money that's coming in through private banks and so on will play. But apart from that, ICT is still a very fast-growing. You're looking at all kinds of new uses is a better word for it on mobile phones, and that area is still growing very rapidly, and people are just constantly looking for new applications and so on. Retail, real estate, definitely. I think that's across, because I think people often forget about the rest of the country. And what has happened is all the states now have you've got much better governance in the states, not all of them, but say even in 10 states. And there's a lot of money ready for investment at a state level. So instead of talking about Lagos or even Abuja, you are talking 10 different places, Akwa Ibom, the Niger Delta, there is crime still there, but we haven't discussed security, but and so on. So I think that almost everything, and I talk to people right down to the smallest kind of goods that you can sell through to beer. SAB Miller's building its brewery there. Fast-moving consumer goods. I was just actually last week at the opening of the new ShopRite in Abuja, and within an hour, that car park and the shop were absolutely bursting at the seams. So there's just everything there's opportunity at every level that just needs feeding, I suppose.
Unbelievably, we've just run out of time. Even the ranking that I wanted us to do and the discussion around security and all the other opportunities, unfortunately, we'll have to reserve them for another day. We've come to the end of this week's edition of Invest Africa. We'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, I'm Godfrey Mutizwa.